Hello there, it's Adam in the Newscast studio, and we're about to record this episode of Newscast just before 3 p.m. on Thursday. Now, I've actually been in here since 8 a.m. on Thursday because we've been doing this Children in Need challenge set for us by Pudsey, where he said, could you do a 25-hour long episode of Newscast? So we have been streaming a constant supply of newscast-like material on BBC Sounds and iPlayer since 8 o'clock this morning. And in the middle of it all, we made the episode of Newscast that you're going to hear now. Hello, it's Adam in the Newscast studio, where I've been for many, many hours, and I'm very pleased to say Henry Zeffman is joining me from Westminster to keep me company. Hello, Henry.
Hello, and I'm in a studio where I've been on and off for very many hours, but not constantly, and I don't know how you're doing it. Can I ask you a question, by the way, that
Please.
I should have asked weeks ago?
Yeah.
Why is it 25 hours, not 24?
Because that is the number for Children in Need this year, because it's 2025. So do 25 for Children in Need.
I see. I bet you wish your podcasts had been invented in 2004.
Well, 4 hours wouldn't really be that impressive.
Well, it would have been then. Podcasting hadn't even been invented yet.
I should just say, for anyone who hasn't seen the Podcast-a-thon but would like to see where we've got up to while they listen to this episode, you can listen on BBC Sounds by clicking on the live news button. And who knows what state I'll be in by the time you click that. Right, Henry, let's talk about the state of the government and specifically where we've got to after this briefing from Number 10 a couple of days ago that Keir Starmer would fight a leadership contest if there was one launched against him, which then spiraled into somebody somewhere saying that Wes Streeting, the health secretary, was going to launch that challenge, which was then denied by Wes Streeting, which has just basically opened up Pandora's box.
Yeah. It's very messy. The mood in Parliament, which is where I spent most of my time since we last spoke 6 or 7 hours ago, is really weird, and really angry still 36 or so hours on from the start of this episode. Not this episode of Newscast, but this political episode. What we've learnt this afternoon is how Keir Starmer is going to respond, because as we were discussing at 8 a.m, there are lots of people in the Labour Party, including people right at the top of the Labour Party, cabinet ministers among them, who blame Morgan McSweeney, the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, for this briefing. Now, that's not to say that in every instance they believe that he was the specific person who phoned up journalists, including at the BBC, to say these things, but they believe that he's behind the strategy, at the very least. Now, the Prime Minister was speaking on a visit to North Wales, and he said that he had been reassured that no Number 10 staff were involved in briefings against cabinet ministers. We're told the Prime Minister spoke to his senior team this morning and reiterated that briefings against cabinet ministers are unacceptable. That is Keir Starmer trying to draw a line under this. I don't think that it is going to be the end of matters because of the level of fury among so many in the Labour Party.
Well, yeah, because that puts a bit of a lid on only the second half of the story, which was the finger being pointed at Wes Streeting. This very much leaves the lid off the first half of the story, which was the briefings about Starmer's position in the first place.
Yeah, you absolutely right to zero in on that distinction. And it can't be stressed enough, I think, just in terms of the background to all of this. This was not a hostile briefing towards Keir Starmer. It has not helped Keir Starmer, but it was delivered by allies of the Prime Minister, people who were trying to help him. They hoped that exposing what has genuinely been a consistent theme of private, off-the-record conversations in Westminster for months now, which is questions about Keir Starmer's leadership. They hoped that by exposing that to the glare of public conversation, it would just sort of almost like look ridiculous the second that it was held up to the light. But the fact that it was the Prime Minister's own supporters, or at least some of them, who decided to do that has just backfired so badly for the Prime Minister.
And if the person who was calling into question Wes Streeting's ambitions wasn't somebody who worked in Number 10 Downing Street for the Prime Minister, then what sort of person might they have been?
Well, look, I mean, it's the right question to ask, but it's difficult for, as you know, but I think it's worth us explaining to the audience. There's a reason that journalists steer clear of conversations like that, because If you ever even entertain like a sort of game of guess who with sources, then people will think that they can narrow down the list. And, source protection is at the absolute heart of what we do. Otherwise, rightly, no one would ever want to talk to us. So I don't think we can really get into that. But, it is observably true in this government, because it's true of every government, that there can be people who are close to prime ministers who don't necessarily have formal roles, or at least aren't necessarily employees. So at any time in any government, this really is just a general point, at any time in any government, there are all sorts of people who can speak with authority about the Prime Minister's mind without necessarily being employed to speak with authority about the Prime Minister's mind.
But their views still being a valid contribution to the conversation.
Yeah, and often a licensed contribution to the conversation as well.
Now, in terms of this as a moment, is this a moment, and this is an impossible to answer question, but it's just a platform for discussion. Is this a moment that just creates a bad vibe and bad blood and lots of aggro? Or is this a moment that then leads to another moment which actually has something happening in it?
It feels like a real moment. Does it lead to something happening imminently? No, I don't think it does, which is kind of ironic given that the original briefing was that allies of the Prime Minister believe that a challenge could come imminently, or at least within a couple of weeks in the aftermath of the budget. It doesn't quite feel that way, though there are MPs I've been speaking to over the last couple of days who believe it could happen that soon. But most people, vast majority I've been speaking to, don't think it will happen like that. Why I think this is such a dangerous moment for the Prime Minister, just to return to that man Morgan McSweeney, is that, who obviously, in the terms of what the Prime Minister said, is covered by that, right? So the Prime Minister has been assured that Morgan McSweeney wasn't responsible for briefing against cabinet ministers. But it feels so dangerous because it's one of those moments where all the grievances come out, where people, including cabinet ministers, other influential people in the Labour Party, sort of start to say, well, while we're talking about Morgan McSweeney, I am wound up about this or that. I'm wound up that I was sacked in the reshuffle, or I'm wound up that I didn't get this job in the reshuffle, or I'm wound up about this policy decision they made, or the way I was treated in that meeting a year ago, whatever it is. But the moments, I think, under successive governments that often become most dangerous in politics are the ones where just all these latent, pent-up issues that when things are going well remain pent up, just burst out of what you described earlier as Pandora's box. I think that's where we are now. I think there are people who want Morgan McSweeney sacked in this government who are not going to stop calling for him to be sacked. And the Prime Minister, I think, doesn't want to sack him. So you end up with a very dangerous clash there, essentially. But the other side of this is that there are people who remain loyal to the Prime Minister, who remain loyal to Morgan McSweeney, and there's an interesting question about the extent to which those two things do and don't overlap, who say there is no Keir Starmer without Morgan McSweeney. This is a man whose entire leadership of the Labour Party has relied on Morgan McSweeney's strategic input. He ran the general election campaign in 2024, and that is worth dwelling upon because there are very few people who have ever run a general election campaign for the Labour Party that the Labour Party has emerged victorious from. But he also ran Keir Starmer's leadership campaign in 2020. He was crucial in shaping the direction in the years of opposition when, frankly, Keir Starmer changed quite a lot from the platform on which he'd won the leadership in 2020, when he made big calls around, Jeremy Corbyn's status in the Labour Party, around tax promises, although that's interesting now in the context of the budget, all sorts of things. Is there such a thing as a Keir Starmer government without Morgan McSweeney at its strategic heart? You ask people that in the Labour Party, and quite a lot of them say no. But also today, quite a lot of them are saying, well, we need to now find out because he's got to go.
And just a little asterisk about who Morgan McSweeney is. You did a great job of explaining his recent history, but some of his more distant history, he was in local government and he spent a lot of his time, as he would describe it, or his friends would describe it, as fighting the far right.
Yeah, absolutely. In East London, where the BNP were getting a foothold, he was heavily involved in organising Labour council campaigns there successfully. And he also was heavily involved in Lambeth Council in South London, where he worked for Steve Reed, who's now a very important player in this government. He's the Communities Secretary, Housing Communities Local Government Secretary. He worked for the Local Government Association. So that's kind of his hinterland, is local government. And as you say, with a particular background in fighting the far right, the BNP, in that era in sort of 2005, 6, 7, 8, when they were doing, relatively well in electoral politics. It's around the time that they won those 2 seats in the European Parliament. Maybe it was more than 2, actually. They won some seats in the European Parliament. His history in the Labour Party under Keir Starmer has been extremely strong, of course. He also ran the leadership campaign of Liz Kendall, now the Science Secretary, in 2015. She got 4.5% of the vote, and Jeremy Corbyn, whose politics were as distant as it's possible to be from hers in that leadership election, of course, won.
Mm. Also on the line is James Cook, who's in studio in Scotland. Hello again, James.
Hello, Adam, in Glasgow.
So Henry was talking about, the next big milestone for the government is the budget. But actually, people talk about a moment where Keir Starmer's enemies could move against him would be after the elections in Scotland next May. Do you want to just give us kind of the big picture of what those elections are shaping up to be?
So in May, we have elections to the devolved Scottish Parliament in Edinburgh, and also the Welsh Senate as well in Cardiff, and English local elections all on the same day. And these elections are going to be, very obviously, a very important test of Sir Keir Starmer's leadership. Now, if you speak to people in Scottish Labour, they'll say a number of things to you. First of all, the Scottish Labour leader, Anas Sarwar, will say on the record that he has found the briefings against the Prime Minister in recent days deeply, deeply unhelpful and also unacceptable. He's not necessarily been quite as forthright as he could have been in saying that he wants Sir Keir Starmer to continue to lead the Labour Party all the way into the next general election. But what people in Scottish Labour are saying is, look, stop talking about this, not us. People within, they're criticising people within Labour in London particularly, and saying, look, can we just please focus on the day job? Can we? They're saying you should ask yourself the question. Anyone who's briefing backwards and forwards here should be asking in the Labour Party the question: is this helping or hindering our campaign in the elections in May? And figures in Scottish Labour are very frustrated because they very much think that this is hindering that campaign. And in terms of that, what Labour would much prefer to be talking about, they will say, look, this is an election to the devolved Scottish Parliament looking after large swathes of domestic Scottish political affairs in terms of health and education and transport and housing and so on. And they would much rather be focusing on critiquing the Scottish National Party, who by the time of the elections will have been in power for 19 years. They came to power in Edinburgh, the SNP, before the first iPhone was released. It's amazing. And so they want to be focusing on that, but also in Scottish Labour, they are very much, as you suggest, Adam, focused immediately on the budget and on whether the budget will help them in their campaign. The key question one figure in the party said to me was, does the budget align with Labour values? And particularly, they are looking for Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, to signal, more than signal, that she is tackling child poverty. And there's been a particular disagreement between the Scottish Labour Party and UK Labour in terms of when, because I think there is an aspiration to do this, Henry will correct me if I'm wrong, at Westminster, when to lift this 2-child cap. So the cap on the benefits you can receive at 2 children. And in Scottish Labour, there's been a more of a feeling, I think, that should be removed sooner rather than later. And Henry, I'm sure you probably have more information on that than me.
On the 2-child benefit cap, it is clearly going to be lifted. That was a very significant development that Rachel Reeves gave to our colleague Matt Chorley on 5 Live earlier this week. And what was so interesting about the argument she made on that was that she said, look, it's not fair to penalise a 3rd or 4th child because of something that they have no control over. Now, that is also an argument, just sort of philosophically, against a 3-child benefit cap or a 4-child benefit cap, or paying a tapered rate of universal credit or the child tax credit to subsequent children beyond the first two children. So actually she went quite a bit further, I think, than a lot of people here in Westminster had been expecting. I think they'd expected perhaps a move in the direction of lifting the two-child benefit cap, but not going the whole distance. It does now seem she is going to go the whole distance, and that will clearly be one of the most significant measures in a budget that we're expecting to be very significant.
And what's interesting in the Scottish context of that is this idea that Scotland is slightly further. It can be and has been sometimes exaggerated, but in some respects, Scotland's a little bit further to the left in politics generally. And so there is a tension between an election in Scotland and the approach being taken at Westminster. And definitely there are people in the Scottish Labour Party who would much rather that the Chancellor had gone quicker with it, much quicker with that. But the wider question, Henry and Adam, that's interesting, I think, here, to come back to your original question, Adam, the wider landscape is, there was a point maybe a year ago, and certainly around the time of the general election, where people thought that Scottish Labour were on, they were on track, that they had a really good shot, and Anas Sarwar had a really good shot of being the next First Minister of Scotland, that the SNP's time in office was limited, and that was the direction of travel. And since then, the SNP under John Swinney's leadership has very much stabilised things. There was a period of, I think it would probably not be too unfair to call it chaos at the end of Nicola Sturgeon's time and under Humza Yousaf as well. And John Swinney is widely regarded as having stabilised things. The SNP are by no means polling at the heights that they were polling under Nicola Sturgeon in, say, 2015, when they had extraordinary electoral success following defeat in the independence referendum in 2014. But the SNP is in a much better position now than it was. Labour is in if not a worse position, not in any better position. And the feeling of many pollsters would be that if the election were held tomorrow, the SNP would probably be able to stay in power. But the thing that's thrown into this mix that complicates everything is that we're now seeing Reform UK involved in Scottish politics, and Nigel Farage making potentially a breakthrough or an impact in Scottish politics in a way we've never seen before. And we're also seeing, and you can have an argument about the chicken and egg aspect of this, immigration rising up the agenda of concerns that voters will tell pollsters that they are interested in. These two things are coming at the same time. That's a concern for the Conservatives, but it's also a concern for Labour, because what has happened for years, and Adam and Henry, we've all talked about this many times over the years, is that one of the reasons the SNP, and the SNP would say that they have positive reasons that they've succeeded in Scotland, in Scottish politics for the last nearly 20 years as well. But one of the negative reasons they've succeeded is because Scottish politics has for so long divided along constitutional lines, and because the SNP has been able to capture by far the largest chunk of the pro-independence vote, whereas the pro-union vote has been split between other parties, that has been helpful to the SNP, and that is likely to be a situation that Reform could potentially help the SNP with in the end, if the vote fragments even further among unionist voters, assuming that people choose to vote along those lines. And of course, Labour, that's why they want to talk about public services. I mean, they don't want, they say that's what this election should be about. And there's a big debate about, and at what point does, how good are the public services cross over into? And, could they be better if there was a different constitutional arrangement? I mean, everything blurs together in the end. And then individual voters will make their individual decisions, as will individual newscasters, about who is right and who's wrong here.
Right. Joining me here in the Newscast studio is someone who knows Keir Starmer very well because he wrote a biography of him and has known him for a long time. It's Tom Baldwin. Hello, Tom. We were talking with Henry a minute ago about that briefing from Downing Street at the lobby this morning about Keir Starmer had a meeting and spoke to all his senior team this morning to find out if people had been briefing against Wes Streeting. What do you think Keir Starmer would have been like in that meeting? What kind of boss is he in those moments?
Keir Starmer hates this sort of briefing. He's said it over and over again. It's almost the sort of antithesis of the kind of politics he likes. The weird thing is, it's also become a characteristic of his government. Right from the get-go, first few weeks of this government, what was the biggest noise coming out of Downing Street? wasn't how they wanted to change the country. It was about where their desks are, what their pay levels were, what their job titles were, and how much they hated the previous chief of staff. Since then, there's been a series of drive-by shootings, as is termed, on ministers, anonymous briefing. We've had a sort of entire book written by two very good journalists, Patrick Maguire and Gabriel Pogron, which seems to sort of relegate the position of the Prime Minister. Again, lots of anonymous briefing.
That quote, for example, that he's like sitting at the front of the Docklands Light Railway, which is a train that drives itself.
Well, there's sort of a wooden instrument of everybody else. And, look, I think the problem what we've had this week is threefold. One is I think, Keir Starmer did want to get out, probably as a sort of line in a column, if someone was be stupid enough to sort of challenge him, he'd take him on. They're not going to force him out that way. And that's, that'd just be like a paragraph. And somebody, and I don't think it was the official Downing Street communications team, decided to go into DEFCON 2 mode, and suddenly, you've got an embargo.
That to too many people.
Well, there was an embargo briefing to like 5-6 media organisations, like dropping a bomb on this whole thing.
And just to explain, an embargoed briefing is you would get a group of people together, say, here's some information I'm giving you. You can report it, but not until 6 p.m.
Yeah, it was like an organised hit. And I think quite a lot of people in Downing Street are actually in charge of the information that comes out of Downing Street, quite surprised by that. And so you have a piece of, rumours and a bit of off-the-record stuff knocking around Parliament. And what you've suddenly done is legitimised it as a story, which we're still talking about 2 days later on broadcast.
So do we think Starmer would have authorised or approved of the idea of putting out the micro version, as you suggested? Or do you think he wouldn't have sanctioned that either?
No, I think the micro version there, that's something he want. I mean, any Prime Minister, I think, would say, if there's some scuttlebutt running around the lobby that one day might be challenged, make it clear, I'll take him on. That's fine. Yes. But it's a paragraph in a Sunday column somewhere, not, a story that we all talk about all week. Because, the tragedy of this for the government, and we use tragedy advisedly, but it is that rather than talking about what the government's doing, how they're trying to change the country, the big plan, the big pitch role they're trying to do for the budget, which is pretty heavy-duty stuff, we're talking about advisors and background briefing and background people again. And it's so destructive. And, sometimes it becomes a sort of endless thing about Morgan McSweeney this or Morgan McSweeney that. I've got a lot of time for Morgan McSweeney. I've got huge respect for him. Like I said earlier today, that he's done something I haven't done, which is help a Labour leader win a general election, right?
Yeah, because you worked for Ed Miliband.
Yeah, and we didn't win. And Morgan McSweeney's part of the campaign which won, and hats off to him. He's great. But his job is chief of staff. And, I believe that he was one of the people that spoke to journalists, and I just don't think that's what the chief of staff's role is. I mean, it's a big enough job as it is.
When you say believe or no,
I understand that he was, and I'm told he wasn't the person who said this drive-by shooting on West Streeting, and I accept that, but I think there's a sort of judgment question about why you want to drop a bomb on everything else the government's doing. So we're once again talking about internal Labour Party wrangling rather than how this Labour government's changing the country. I think I think that's the issue.
Henry?
Hi, Tom. It's Henry Zeffman.
Hello,
here.
Henry.
I think what's quite significant about what Tom has just said is that lots of people listening might think that what Tom has just alleged of Morgan McSweeney, and by the way, we've given him a chance to say whether he wants to comment on the claims people are making about him talking to journalists, and we haven't had a response. But people will think that contradicts what the Prime Minister has said this afternoon, which is that no member of his team was involved in briefing against a cabinet minister. Actually, I'm saying why it doesn't. I'm saying why it doesn't, because Adam, you correctly identified earlier that actually the Prime Minister's denial was a bit more limited than it might have initially seemed, which was he was talking about specifically the element about cabinet ministers rather than the broader sense that he would fight a leadership challenge. And I just think it's important for people who understandably don't live in this world of SW1 to understand the sort of slight nuance there, given what Tom's just said.
I'm not making some allegation against Morgan McSweeney. I think the world as dog knows that Morgan was involved in that briefing, and I don't think there's some sort of massive revelation. I think Henry's right to say he wasn't involved, it appears, in the briefing against Wes Streeting, but there's a process here. There's a whole, it seems like this is an organised hit, and one of those people involved did brief against Wes Streeting, and that's why the Prime Minister's apologised to Wes Streeting.
Do you think, Tom, in terms of your point that, I hear again and again from people around him, the Prime Minister hates briefings like this, and it's visible when he often has to answer questions in their aftermath, as he has had to today, that he's not enjoying it. Do you think the Cabinet still believes him when he says that?
Yeah, because sometimes when there's been briefing, I remember there's a briefing to Tim Shipman in the Sunday Times
who's now at the Spectator,
who said that Bridget Phillipson was going to be moved, Ed Miliband was going to be moved, Lisa Nanny was going to be moved, Richard Herman was going to be moved. None of them were moved.
Yeah.
And I know the Prime Minister phoned some of them up after that briefing and said, I hate this, and I want to tell you, you're not going to be moved. So sometimes I think this briefing is counterproductive for.
He did end up trying to move Ed Miliband. Yeah? It's worth saying he ended up trying to move Ed Miliband.
He didn't move him.
Well, Ed Miliband didn't want to.
Just going back to something you said a bit earlier, Tom, you said that this briefing, which you find so annoying for the government, happened from the very beginning. So Keir Starmer has had since July 2024 to get a grip of it. Why hasn't he?
Well, I think it happened before.
Especially if he hates it so much.
I think it was actually happening before in opposition too. It's hard to prove who's doing things. That's the real sort of cancerous nature of anonymous briefing. You don't know who it is. One Downing Street source, a senior advisor. They're always seen. Never say junior advisor. And I don't know whether it's cultural or just a bad habit, but there's this sort of. I thought this was a kind of characteristic of the last Tory government, where everyone was like running around whispering into their phones in the sort of that clown show we saw towards the end. And I didn't think Labour would take this into government, but they have. And maybe it's difficult if Henry's on the phone, you pick it up because Henry's someone you've been speaking to for ages. But people do need to stay in their line. Government is a serious business. It's not about feeding whatever media narrative there is for that day and trying to get your anonymous quote in and feeling big about yourself because you've been quoted in this or that. It's about taking decisions which affect people's lives. And it's a really, really serious business. And I sometimes think we've got this incredibly serious Prime Minister. We've got really serious chances. We've got lots of really serious people in this government. And there's too many people running around thinking politics is a game. And it's not. It matters more than that.
We saw what Starmer did today. He had his chat with his senior advisors and laid down the law. That's one option. Is there an option he could take to get a grip of this that he hasn't taken yet?
I think he needs to make it clear to people that what their jobs are. Some people's jobs are to talk to the media. Some people's jobs are to, work with MPs. Some people's jobs are to work on policy. Some people's jobs are to manage that whole Downing Street operation. And I said earlier today that, I used to cover Labour politics for the Times and other newspapers. And in that whole period of Labour government, I think I spoke to the Chief of Staff, Jonathan Powell, maybe once or twice. And that's what, Chief of Staff, it's not his job to brief the President. I've read too many columns about, what Morgan McSweeney thinks rather than what Keir Starmer thinks. And, and I say, I like Morgan. I've got an enormous amount of time for him. I actually don't want to leave Downing Street. I think he's a massive asset. And I can't imagine a Keir Starmer premiership without Morgan McSweeney. For Morgan's sake, for Keir's sake, for the government's sake, stick to the day job.
Henry, there's another story today about another senior figure in Downing Street, although one who's arrived there much more recently than Morgan McSweeney. It's the comms guy, Tim Allen. Although I say he's arrived recently, he was in Downing Street many, many moons ago in another era, in another role, but he came back recently.
Yeah, he was the Deputy Director of Communications, if I'm remembering rightly, in the first year or so of Tony Blair's government, went off and had a very successful career in the private sector, recently come back in the past couple of months or so as the Prime Minister's Executive Director of Communications. And the story that's being initially reported by Sky News and picked up certainly by opposition parties is that Tim Allen still owns a stake in a public affairs company called Strand Partners, which he was involved in before he came back to government. Because of the Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives both calling for some sort of inquiry into this, it was asked of the Prime Minister's spokesman earlier. The Prime Minister's spokesman defended Tim Allen, said he had fully complied with a rigorous process to identify any conflicts of interest before his appointment, said that he's following the rules set out in a special advisor code of conduct, and that lists of special advisor interests are published annually. One element of this story that we should just reflect, of course, is that Tom has a role with Strand Partners. A spokesperson for Strand Partners has said to us, Tom is a journalist and the biographer of the Prime Minister. He doesn't engage in government relations for Strand, and this is not part of his terms of engagement with us. And they also, by the way, on Tim Allen say he receives no financial benefit from Strand and is not involved in our operation. So that's the sort of summary. Obviously, Tom is there. So, far away, Adam.
Do you want to add to that, Tom?
Not really. I mean, this is a Sky story, which is a pretty shoddy piece of journalism, in my view, because it's based on a false premise, one false premise that I operate as a lobbyist, and I don't. I've made it very clear when I do this part-time work for Strand, it's written to my terms of engagement, that I don't do lobbying, I don't do public affairs. So I don't quite know what the story is. So there's one false premise and zero facts, zero evidence, because there isn't any, that sort of my contact with people right across government, somehow to the benefit of Strand clients who I don't work with.
And I'm sure Sky News would say that this is a piece of journalism done in good faith. But you do speak to Tim Allen because you know him and
I
you
speak
work
to lots of people. That's what I do. And when I do stuff at Strand, I do sort of talking head stuff like I'm doing with you. But the idea that I provide some sort of it's not worth dignifying really. But I've said what I've said.
Is there a danger, though, that people perceive there being some kind of conflict of interest or too closeness there? And I'm not saying whether there is or there isn't. I'm just saying we've been talking for a lot of this conversation about how people experience things, that people think, oh yeah, it's all too cozy. And is there something you could do to make it look less cozy?
Well, forgive me, whenever people say it's about perceptions, that's usually because they actually haven't got any facts, right? And what people do, what journalists do sometimes, and I used to be a journalist, is you've got these, there's this and there's that, and and they try and create a sort of sense of innuendo and suspicion when you can't actually put facts together because there aren't any facts in this. So that's a journalistic technique. It's not one I think it's particularly edifying, but it does happen. But I'm not really interested in talking about perceptions on a story which I think is a shoddy piece of journalism.
Okay. Henry, I'm going to let you go. Thank you for your time today.
Thanks, Adam. I think I'm back with you at 8 in the morning tomorrow or something
Great.
like that.
Look forward to it.
Enjoy the. How many hours have you got left now?
I've lost track. I'm finishing at 9 a.m. So,
Gosh.
What is it? Still a long way to go.
A long way.
A lot done, a lot still to do.
All right.
What are you going to be talking about in the middle of the
James.
night?
Well, see, Henry, this is the great thing, though, because we've got people all around the world. For example, Lise Doucet is in Canada, so she's available at 2 o'clock in the morning. Perfect. Australia's awake then? China?
And how are you staying awake? What are you taking?
Water.
Coffee?
I'll have coffee every now and then. I've been warned to limit my coffee intake because caffeine's not great for you. It's like a short-term stimulant, long-term dip.
We've all been there.
Well, I mean, it's election night writ large, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, good luck. It's a sort of endurance test. It's fantastic.
I'm just thinking, though, the 2015 election night, you would have had quite enough to keep you awake. Just the activity. It's not a comment on the result. I just mean it's an insane time.
Not
I don't
really.
know. Maybe you went to bed.
It was not. I mean, it was just a very miserable night, and remember walking around St James's Park quite a lot of time with my friend Mark Steers, who's quoting Hegel at me And there wasn't much for us to do, really, because we were losing and we knew we were losing.
Yeah, and I remember then let's not dwell on it. Anyway, but back to the life and times of Keir Starmer. Are you going to do an update of the book? Is there another couple of chapters coming?
I've done an update on the first year, which includes quite a lot of comments from him on things he's got right and what he's got wrong, and also my own sort of perceptions of how the government's operating. I do talk there actually about this sort of culture of these anonymous briefings and how incensed Keir is by it. I think, and I mean, it might be that this is a cathartic moment. I hope so, where you can say you want to stamp this out, and everyone goes, yeah, and they carry on. This has been a pretty serious episode for them, and I hope this is a moment where the government does knuckle down and everyone just sticks to their jobs and begins to operate a bit more like Keir Starmer himself in that sort of serious, fact-based way, rather than piggybacking on the sort of hype and hysteria of the sort of cycle of lots of journalists who get excited about these internal wranglings and advisors, because advisors are the people that journalists speak to. So you always want to elevate up the role of advisors. But in the end, it's advisors advise, and I was one. It's ministers who decide. I do think we should talk about ministers and prime ministers a bit more than we talk about advisors.
Well, okay, let's talk about the prime minister. I mean, I'm guessing you still talk to him, whether it's to write books or not. I mean, how does he feel things are going?
I haven't asked that question.
Because it's a really obvious, quite basic question. You probably ask better ones.
I mean, my sense of Keir Starmer is that he is in keep calm and carry on mode, right? There's, and that's sort of what's weird about this sort of let's spend the whole week talking about leadership challenges. No, you've got a budget coming. You've got some really, really big, meaty reforms, of the NHS, which we should have been talking about yesterday. And it's this distraction. It's this sort of, it's fun for SW1 journalism. I don't think the public are that fascinated about advisors in Downing Street. They want to know whether their living standards are going to get better. They want to know how houses are going to get built. They want to know whether they get an appointment at the NHS. They want to know what's happening to their energy bills. That is what politics should be about. And we do this sort of inside baseball thing because those are the people we talk to. But it's like a village talking to itself. And it's one of the reasons why politics is so alienating for so many people in the public. And we talk about populism. We talk about why politics seems out of touch. This obsession with unelected advisors or anonymous briefing, off-the-record quotes about each other is really part of the reason why we have a problem with our democracy.
No, but then isn't it up to Starmer to do something big to change the debate, to change the culture? And he obviously thought he was doing that by winning the election and fighting the campaign that he did, but it obviously hasn't worked. Don't you think he needs to pull the ejector seat, push the emergency button or something?
Look, I don't think I think if you're saying Morgan McSweeney, implying Morgan McSweeney, I think he's a huge asset to Keir Starmer, and I don't think.
I meant do something a bit more dramatic. I didn't mean. I realised the ejector seat's a bad metaphor.
What do you mean dramatic? Like sort of go up in a hot air balloon or run down Whitehall naked? I mean,
don't take.
I mean, look, he's governing, right? He's taking big decisions. And quite often the media don't talk about that. Quite often he goes on these foreign trips and, it's an important foreign trip to COP or somewhere like that. And you get the media asking about what the latest scuttlebutt from the lobby is. And doesn't ask me anything press conference. And, I do think we need to show a bit more respect to government. I mean, whatever government, because that's actually the decisions they take are what actually is affecting people, your audience, rather than the who's up, who's down, what someone said behind someone's back. It's just not what changes lives. It's not what people's ordinary lives are about.
Yeah, but I mean, look at that quote that Rachel Reeves is giving all the time now, which is, we can't deal with the world as we'd like it to be. We have to deal with the world as it is. Isn't it a case that this is the world as it is, and maybe Starmer needs to do something to change the conversation onto the things that he wants?
Well, the world
just talking about good work is obviously not enough.
But the world as it is people struggling with a hot cost living crisis, a government struggling with huge public debt, a world on fire with huge towering challenges, from climate change to new technology to the the attack on democracy coming from both within and without Europe, at the moment. That is the world as it is. The world as it is not, oh, have you heard the latest anonymous briefing from X in government about Y in government? That is, I'm afraid, it used to be sort of what being diary columns, and now it's front page news. And I actually find it quite boring.
Last question. Did you listen to Starmer on Radio 3 on Private Passions?
I did.
What did you think? Because I haven't got around to listening to it yet. What did you make of it?
I thought it was very much more the Keir Starmer I know than the one we sometimes see, at a press conference trying to deal with lots of gotcha questions. He was able to talk at length about himself and his values. I also thought the way he talked about music was fascinating. He had a sort of articulacy on music that you don't always hear him on politics, where I think he's always having to sort of second guess himself. And the way some of the words and language he used to describe music, which I actually thought was fascinating. It was really sort of deep and rich. It was a fantastic interview. And if you haven't heard of any, newscast listeners, I would strongly recommend it.
Yeah, Radio 3, just search for Private Passions and you'll be able to listen to it. Tom, thank you very much. And thanks for coming into the studio as well.
Thank you for having me.